I thought I'd say something today about the differences between two forms of Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism, the Buddhism of the elders, and Mahayana Buddhism, particularly the subdivision called Vajrayana, or Tibetan Buddhism often. I've been influenced by both, and I'm interested in both, and I thought I'd give a few reflections here, especially for people who might be coming to Buddhism and not really know much about differences between the different branches of Buddhism, and not really know where to start when making a choice. So I can't say that I'm going to give any sort of advice about what should be chosen, but perhaps I can make the situation a bit clearer so an individual is able to make a choice based on the facts. Theravada Buddhism is the oldest form of Buddhism. It's called the Buddhism of the elders. That's what Theravada means. It's often called Hinayana by the Mahayana, but that's not really very agreeable, perhaps, because Mahayana means greater vehicle and Hinayana means lesser vehicle. So I don't think the Theravada Buddhists would ever call themselves a lesser vehicle. It's obviously terminology coming from Mahayana Buddhism, which calls themselves the greater vehicle and Theravada the lesser vehicle. So it's the oldest Buddhism, and it's based on the teachings of the historical Buddha, and the religious texts involved are called suttas, and the Dhammapada includes about 400 verses taken from the original Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha. So there is a certain authenticity about this, because after the Buddha died, there was the first Buddhist council, and all the sayings of the teachings of the Buddha were brought together, and there were people around who could remember what he actually said, like Ananda, his attendant. So these suttas, they usually begin, "Thus have I heard," and it's Ananda who is said to have had this wonderful memory recalling what the Buddha said. So that's Theravada Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism developed probably 400 or 500 years later. Well, it was a process, of course, but it's based on what's called the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. So Theravada Buddhism believes in just one turning of the wheel of Dharma, or teaching of the Buddha, and that took place at Sarnath in India after the Buddha's enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. So first turning of the wheel of Dharma, or the turning of the wheel of Dharma, is when the Buddha started to teach his Dhamma until the end of his life, and that's what we've experienced, and that's what we know, and that's what we have from a Theravada point of view. The Mahayanas believe that later on there was a second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and these suttas, or sutras as they're called in the Mahayana, were secret teachings, basically, that the Buddha thought should come to light later. The world was not yet ready for them, so he hid them, and Nagarjuna is said to have discovered them in a cave long after the Buddha's death. So these Mahayana sutras are some of the more famous ones, actually, for non-Buddhists. Probably not a lot of non-Buddhists have heard of the Lotus Sutra, and the Heart Sutra, and the Diamond Sutra. Some Mahayana groups are based on these sutras, like Nichiren Buddhism in Japan is based on the Lotus Sutra. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo means I believe in the Lotus Sutra. So these Prajna Paramita Sutras are non-existent really in Theravada Buddhism, and they include teachings of the Buddha about emptiness, shunyata, and there's often a kind of mystical, almost mythical element to them, and they're not like the original suttas of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, just a teacher going around teaching. The Buddha has become a kind of god and teaching bodhisattvas, great beings who will return to help humankind to Buddhahood. An adaptation or development of Mahayana took place later in terms of the Vajrayana, which emphasizes Tantra more and a clear view, or Dzogchen, and it's best known in the modern day in terms of the teachings that come from Tibet and to some extent Nepal, certainly Bhutan. All of these forms of Buddhism, of course, developed in India originally, and we can see it as a process. Some people say that perhaps over the centuries Buddhism began to seem more like Hinduism as Hinduism took over again in India, and certainly Tantric Buddhism in the Vajrayana is more similar in some ways to the tantras of Hinduism. But in Vajrayana there is a third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which it's hard to pinpoint in time, but it took place, and it talks about Buddha nature. Everybody has a Buddha nature, and it's full of secret teachings, of course, and these teachings are usually discovered by people called Teretons, who special individuals who are blessed with the ability to locate these secret teachings. Meditation techniques are different as well. So in Theravada Buddhism, the emphasis is on what they call shamatha, samatha, and vipassana. Samatha is more about one-pointed concentration, and the idea is to concentrate on some object, like a fire or a flame, in order to calm the mind. This is a kind of concentration, this is a kind of meditation that someone would do after doing a workout in yoga, perhaps, something for 5 or 10 minutes, where it might be kind of useful, but it's not taking you to higher mind states, it's just calming the mind. That's what it is, calming the mind. It's a preparation for vipassana, which is insight meditation and based on reality. So the idea of samatha meditation is that it's not really based on reality. If you concentrate on an object like a flame, then you're thinking about the concept of fire, and concepts don't have any real existence. Concepts don't have any real existence. It's only by actually thinking about things like your body, your emotions, your mind, or concentrating on these things which are taken to be real, that you can have true insight. So a lot of Theravada Buddhism concentrates on this vipassana meditation, where you are thinking about aspects of the body and the mind and the emotions and the things that lie, the objects of the mind, and just observing them. And the idea is that by doing this, you come to a deeper understanding of reality. If you're just thinking about an object, things in the real world, things in the world are not actually real. So if it's conceptual, then a concept is not real. Like flame is not real. You're thinking of fire, that's a concept. It's not real. So with samatha meditation, you can never reach a very high level. In my experience with Mahayana or Vajrayana, they don't make this distinction so much between samatha and vipassana. In fact, they don't use those terms at all, really, except insofar as they accept that what they call the Hinayana is a true form of Buddhism, but slower than Vajrayana. So if you want to take that path, you can, but they themselves mostly don't. So you don't hear a lot about samatha and vipassana. What you do hear a lot about is tantra, where the practitioner visualizes a particular kind of mandala. You can say a holy grouping of sacred grouping of objects and deities, something like that. And often it's highly complex. The practitioner needs to visualize a palace, for example, and inside every room there will be something different. Chakravartin, Greek kings of the Dharma, and so on and so forth. And one's progress in practice depends on how well one can actually make the visualization, especially in what they call higher yoga tantra, which is taken to be something that can lead to enlightenment. But they have two stages. They have what they call the generation stage, and that's this visualization of deities and perhaps seeing oneself as one of the tantric deities. And then later on they have the completion stage, which is where one visualizes probably the body a lot more, and taking ideas from Vedanta and Hinduism. There is the concept or the idea of, not the idea, the reality of the Sushumna, the central channel with the Ida and Pingala on either side. And the idea is to pile up the life drops in the body into the Sushumna. There are thousands and thousands of them, so you have to really visualize going through the whole body and bringing all the red and white drops into the central Sushumna, and by doing this eventually higher state of mind, enlightenment perhaps, is reached. So probably one does not reach enlightenment through visualization alone, through the generation stage. It's only once one reaches the completion stage that enlightenment would be possible. And that is kind of similar to the Therevada belief, because both are now concentrating on the body and aspects of the body and the mind. So a visualization, in the end, however complex it may be, would be some kind of samatha meditation, I suppose. It's conceptual and so not real. It's only when one concentrates on the body and what's the mind and the emotions that one is considering what's real in the world. So that's interesting. It might be said that the Theravada concept is a lot more straightforward in some ways than the Vajrayana idea. Vajrayana idea is highly complex, and it's extremely difficult to visualize all these rooms and palaces and what's going on in every room. And maybe at the end of it all, it's only samatha meditation anyway. One then has to move on. When one can do that well, that one has to move on to the generation stage, and that involves all sorts of things with piling up red and white particles in the central sushumna. So it actually seems to be a lot more long-winded as a process to reach a higher state of mind than the Theravada idea of vipassana, which is far simpler and concentrated on the mind, the body, the emotions, and the dhammas. So this probably has a lot to do with the nature of the hierarchical structure of Tibetan Bhutanese society, where the masters gave the information bit by bit to the students, and the material became more and more diverse, and it took longer and longer to reach enlightenment. So there were so many practices, so many alternative practices, and they're all said to be able to eventually lead to the higher mind states. But few of them really are practices which can are actually based on reality, like the completion stage of higher yoga tantra. And probably you have to have some kind of focus on the body and the mind and the emotions to reach those higher mind states. Both Theravada and Vajrayana took a lot from Vedanta and Hinduism, obviously karma, and rebirth, the idea of rebirth. These all come from Hinduism, basically. And in some ways, Vedanta is a lot more straightforward when it comes to meditation than say Vajrayana. So anyone who's done yogic meditation, they may have tried Kundalini yoga at some time, which is a visualization of the different chakras and the idea that there is a force or energy or power in the bottom chakra, the chakra at the bottom of the spine, the Muladhara chakra, and you, through concentrating on that chakra, the Kundalini power, which is inherent in the body, is awoken and rises as a flame up, or as an energy really, up the sushumna, finally to the brow, and to the crown chakra, when, if everything has been done successfully, samadhi is reached. And this is a far more clear practice, really, and the instructions are far easier to follow than in the Vajrayana practices, which usually involve thousands and thousands of red and white particles being moved around the body and eventually moving into the sushumna after having spent so much time on the generation stage practices anyway, of visualization. So both take a lot from Vedanta. Of course, Vedanta believes in non-dualism, which basically means that everything comes from one material in the universe, so there is no real difference, like all pots are made from clay, all things in the universe are made from one substance. In Hinduism, it's Brahma. And also Vajrayana believes in non-dualism. It doesn't see it in exactly the same way, but thinks that everything in the end is the same. So talk about emptiness, shunyata. But one way the Theravadins and the Vajrayana differ is that they don't really agree about this. So the Theravadins don't believe in non-duality. Don't believe in non-duality. There is a real difference between samsara, the world of our world, the conditioned world, the world that is created, and nibbana, which is the unconditioned world. But the Vajrayana believe that finally nibbana and samsara and all the other realms in between are the same, are one and the same at the highest level, and there might be some connection with the Hinduism in this case, but there is no concept in Vajrayana of the Atman either, the personal soul. In Hinduism, the idea is that everybody has an individual Atman, and it's like the air inside a pot. There are lots of pots and they all have air inside them, but if you break them all, then the air in the pots just join the air outside. So everybody has a soul, but it's a rather impersonal kind of soul that just goes back to the source at the end. But anyway, so these Mahayana sutras, Prajnaparamita sutras, second turning of the wheel of Dharma, talk about this non-duality, the fact that samsara and nirvana is finally the same thing once you can perceive it. So the idea is particular types of karma create the different realms. So everybody in the human realm has a particular kind of karma, and so they create their world. But if you had a higher point of view, you would be able to see that what is here is not really what we think it is, and at the very highest level, everything is the same. That's very different to the Theravada point of view of samsara is forever different to nirvana or nibbana, and there's no way of reconciling those two really. But I think that once you get to these higher levels, perhaps it's not really worth bothering about it too much. These are fairly pedantic points, similar to theology and other religions. The point is that both Theravada and Vajrayana, Mahayana took so much from Hinduism anyway when it comes to the philosophy and these ideas. And if you read the Vedanta about the Atman and non-duality, then I think you're not really too far away from the Buddhist point of view, and it's only in a very dogmatic, very dogmatic, doctrinal point of view that there are major problems between Theravada and Vajrayana on this level. A very wise man once said one should just know what one knows and not pretend to know other things. So just accept that you don't know some things, so perhaps let the practice take you as far as you can and see where you end up. And that would seem to be quite a good idea. So it depends a lot on your personality and your character, which type of Buddhism you're going to take up. The Mahayana is more elaborate, there's more ritual in it, and one of the characteristics of more enlightened beings is that they don't believe in the efficacy of rituals. So in the Theravada tradition, people on the first step of enlightenment, the Sotapannas, and the Sakadagami and the Anagami, the second and third stage of enlightenment, they're going towards enlightenment, but they're not there yet. They're not arahants. characteristic of these people is that they don't believe in ritual, so they don't believe in the efficacy of ritual. That's one of the points. So if maybe for people who are just beginning, ritual is very important in terms of making them act in a better way and bringing their minds up to a higher level. But at the highest level, that's not going to bring you enlightenment. So there is more ritual in the Vajrayana than there is in the Hinayana, or the Therevada. But there's quite a lot in both. So if you like ritual, then probably prefer the Vajrayana. There are so many teachings in the Vajrayana that it's very easy to get lost, not to really know what you're doing. You'll be given a practice, and it's difficult to know exactly what kind of practice it is. Is it a type of initial teaching, or is it a more advanced teaching, or is it suitable for you? Is there other teachings which could do the same thing, which would be more suitable? It's really an ocean, and when there is an ocean, on the one side and on the other side, there is something more clear and obvious going in the same direction. Then somebody with a very logical, clear objectives might want to follow the more specific path than the one which is full of so many side steps, really, so much going on in Vajrayana. But it's also quite beautiful, and the visualizations are beautiful, and the idea of the different deities, and the wrathful deities, and the loving deities, and all this kind of thing. It's a world in itself, but it's a massive world, and it's full of so many different things that it's easy to get lost in. I think it's easier to keep your bearings in the Theravada tradition. So those are some ideas about the differences between, and also some similarities between, Theravada and Mahayana, Vajrayana Buddhism, and also a little bit about how they relate to Hinduism and Vedanta. And I hope that they've been useful for anyone who might be thinking about getting into Buddhism and maybe choosing one path or another. Neither of them are right or wrong, it just depends on your personality, largely. So, hope it's been useful. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.